This was a long-awaited press conference at the end of a two-month period known as the Grand Debate, the big debate here in France, to try to quell the anger over the yellow vest protests. Many of those protesters saying that they haven't got enough money to survive, even though they have full-time jobs in France because they're too heavily taxed. And they want the government to intervene to try to make their lives easier and give them more spending power. So after 2 months of debates, Emmanuel Macron's finally come up with a few solutions. Here they are. This is what he was announcing last night. The key measure was an income tax cut of 5 billion euros. Now, that was rather vague because we don't know exactly where those taxes are going to take place. Many people saying it could be a lowering of from 14 to 5% on the lowest tax rate in France. That wasn't announced last night, but he has said that 5 billion euros will be given over to cutting income tax, probably for the low-income families who pay tax in this country. There was also the indexation of all pensions on the inflation rate by 2021. That was also a key demand of the Yellow Vest protesters, so the president has announced that. The creation of a citizens' convention and the use of more referendum. They were asking for referendum to be much more widely used and much easier to get access to. The president hasn't given in to that. He says now, from now onwards, instead of 4.5 million people being necessary to obtain a referendum through a petition, that figure is now being brought down to 1 million. There will be a 30% cut in the number of lawmakers in the National Assembly and the Senate in France, and also the introduction of 20% of proportional representation. That was also another key measure which was announced during the election campaign by Emmanuel Macron, and he has now announced that it's officially going to take place. One other measure which he did say, Delano, which is quite interesting, he did announce plans to do away with the crack grande école, the École Nationale d'Administration, the ENA, which is situated in Strasbourg now in eastern France, and which is the school where Emmanuel Macron himself went, and which is perceived by many French people as creating people who are too aloof and too out of contact with the everyday problems facing French society. So that school is going to be overhauled to make it more accessible to people from all walks of life and different cultures in France.
We'll see if that actually takes place. Now, you've listed out the measures, Philip. I want to know, how have people reacted to the president's proposals? And more importantly, tomorrow is Saturday. Tomorrow could potentially be the 24th Saturday of protests.
That is absolutely right. I've got a timeline of the Yellow Vest protest movement for you here, just for those who don't know exactly what's been going on in France. The 17th of November were the first protests. That was over a proposed hike in petrol prices to clamp down on diesel fuel. On the 5th of December, President Macron announced he was not going to introduce that tax hike. On the 11th of December, he announced a €100 increase for the minimum wage. Those protests continue. The Grand Debate I was just talking about, that started on the 15th of January. It lasted for 2 months. Over 1.5 million French people took part in that debate, either with meetings in town halls around the country or via internet, putting in their questions for the government, their points they thought that should be discussed. And Emmanuel Macron came up with his ideas yesterday. But on the 26th of April, you're right, it'll be week 24 of the Yellow Vest protest. So what is going to happen next? Well, it's difficult to know exactly what the president is going to do, but opinion polls held today have already shown that a lot of people don't think that he was convincing last night. 63% of French people questioned say they were not convinced by President Macron's announcements yesterday, with only 31% saying that they thought that he actually came up with some concrete proposals which they accepted and they thought were the right move forward. But on the bottom line is here that President Macron hasn't given in to the demands of the Yellow Vest protesters. He is going to stick to his project, which he thinks is the right one, and he says he's going to carry on with his plans up until the end of his mandate in 3 years' time.